we had a number of strokes of luck at The Simpsons, which allowed us to be running the show within 2 years of having arrived there. Conan O'Brien, who was ahead of us in line, suddenly became a famous talk show host and left, thereby making us the most senior people there after like 8 months.
On the show, we talked to legendary American television writer and producer Bill Oakley. Bill has worked on various shows down the years, such as The Simpsons, Futurama and The Cleveland Show. Bill, alongside his writing partner Josh Weinstein, have written numerous classic Simpsons episodes, such as Who Shot Mr. Burns, Bart vs. Australia, and 22 short films about Springfield. He's the brains behind Steamed Hams, and one of his earliest episodes, which he wrote for The Simpsons, is believed to have predicted the events of 2020. Bill starts off by telling us about one of his more recent projects, Close Enough.
I actually worked on the show early on. I worked on, you guys know what Regular Show is?
Is that like one of the late night ones?
Okay, it's by the same guy who did Regular Show, which was here in America. It was on Adults, or it was on Cartoon Network. And it's anyway. So I have worked with that guy, the guy who created that, J.G. Quintel. I worked with him, kind of helping develop that for a little bit into a series. And then he called me when he had his new series, and I did the same thing. So I wouldn't say I was like a full-time person on the show, and I kind of helped. He bounced stuff off me in the early days, and I worked with the team for a few months, and we made up some stories, and I did write the script for one of the first episodes. This project was had a long time coming to air, because I actually did all that work in 2017, in like March of 2017. And that show just came on the air 2 months ago. And it had a long history, but it's really funny. And basically it's very hard to describe to the casual viewer. I think you kind of have to see it. It has a very strange, off-the-wall, surreal quality to it, much like Regular Show did. It's got that same sensibility, and he was one of the stars. The creator is one of the stars of the show, as he was in Regular Show, and it's really and totally informed by his extremely surreal, off-the-wall sense of humor. And it's a more domestic setting. It's basically a small family based on his own life. You know, there's a husband and a wife, and they're young, and they have a kid, and they also have sort of like roommates or apartment mates who are a divorced couple. But that sounds extremely domestic and regular, but it's extremely insane. Like, the stories may start out from some real place, but they spiral into total craziness, unbelievable craziness, which is really funny. And so I was extremely excited to have worked on it, and I was surprised. Honestly, I was kind of surprised when it finally came out, because it took 3 years between the time that I had last worked on it and the time that it suddenly came out, and I really enjoy it.
So you were saying it took 3 years. So I'm kind of interested in like the writing process, and maybe just like comedy writing in general. So do you think comedy changes, and what people find even funny changes over like maybe the space of a decade or two? Or does the principles remain the same?
Some of the principles remain the same. I think it definitely changes. I think that there's no question that it changes, and the longer people's sense of humor changes.
Right.
It's very hard to be amused by cartoons and humorous magazine articles from 1890 or 1900. Like, people's senses of humor were extremely different back then, and it's very rare to find stuff that still holds up today. But like, an example would be Buster Keaton, or films of Buster Keaton, or the writings of, this would be in America, writings of Robert Benchley, some of the things by Mark Twain. But most of the things are very particular to a sense of humor in their time, and are no longer funny to us modern people. But stuff from the 50s and 60s is still funny, and some stuff from the 30s, like TV shows and certain movies, still hold up. But I think what's happened is that as popular culture has become so diverse, and it's not just like, 30 years ago, everybody was watching the same movies, everybody was watching the same 3 TV channels and reading one Mad magazine, and that was it. And now that was where you developed your sense of humor. And I think that now that there's 20 gazillion places to get your humor, we have a slightly more diverse set of senses of humor, which is why it's extremely hard to appeal to a large group of people. And when that happens, in the case of with the last mega successful sitcom we'll ever see, which is like The Big Bang Theory or Modern Family, like, that's why that kind of thing is such gold, because it's, some people like really off the wall humor, and some people like really domestic humor, and some people like really simple jokes. And so like if you can get something that even gets 20 or 30% of the audience to agree that it's enjoyable, it's a gold mine.
Yeah.
So that's why they continue to do it, even though 99% of the stuff doesn't succeed.
So, do you think there's a golden era for comedy when it was at its best?
No, I wouldn't say that there's any particular era when it was at its best. I think it comes and goes depending on certain groups of creators that had chief prominence. Like I suspect that people would say that comedy was at in America, certain peaks would be like in the mid to late 1950s when Mad Magazine was at its early heights, and when TV was taking off with things like Milton Berle and the Sid Caesar and things like that. And there were also a number of really funny movies and TV shows at the same time. So that would be one. But then again, we had another peak in the 70s, which was inspired by things like the National Lampoon magazine, Saturday Night Live, and the National Lampoon movies. And it was probably a group of maybe like 10 or 15 people and 10 or 15 actors that kind of just cross-pollinated over and over again to make things like Animal House and National Lampoon's magazine, things like that. So that, and then I think we had that again in the 90s to some extent with things like the works of Mr. Show and Odenkirk and Cross and the team of people who worked on the Ben Stiller Show and things like that. So what I guess I was saying is there's probably been a number of golden and silver eras, and a lot of it would depend on what your personal sense of humor is, because a lot of people probably don't know any of those things I'm talking about and just thought that Jay Leno was hilarious, for 20 straight years. So I would say, yes, there have been certain golden eras that I would pick out of a hat, but many people wouldn't agree probably.
So obviously, you've worked on, I guess, like countless top shows, The Simpsons, Futurama, like the Cleveland Show. We're kind of particularly interested in how you kind of got started, really, when you go back to school and how you met Josh. So it'd be great to kind of hear just, how you kind of got into the writing and where it all began for you.
Sure. I was like, it started out because I was a weird, lonely kid who lived out on a farm, and the only most of the entertainment was old issues of Mad Magazine that my brother had left in the attic. And so, like, this was when I was like 6, 7, and 8 years old. There wasn't back in those days. There wasn't that much comedy TV that was appealed to kids, and like there's only 3 TV channels, and like their cartoons were not on all day. And so like I found all these old Mad Magazines in the attic that my brother had left when he went to college, and also some National Lampoon magazines. And I spent all my time reading those and that kind of shaped my sense of humor. And then I decided I wanted to be a cartoonist. So I drew a lot of cartoons and comic strips and things like that from the time I was like 7 all the way up through junior high and high school. And that's where I met Josh in 9th grade. And he and I worked on a number of different things together on the school newspaper. And then we started a humor magazine, which he wrote a lot of and I drew a lot of and designed, and sort of I was like the editor in chief and he was the executive editor. And it was really good. In retrospect, the magazine, for a high school magazine, it was incredibly good. It was easily better than most college humor magazines. And so that got us our start. And then I went to college and I went to work on the Harvard Lampoon, which had been my goal for years, because that's like the college humor magazine gold standard. And I was lucky enough to get in there and get into the Lampoon. And then Josh was working on the Stanford Humor magazine at Stanford. And we had a joint issue of those 2 magazines. And we also kind of made him an honorary member. We worked on a lot of stuff together. And then we decided we wanted to go into TV writing. That was the thing that people were doing. The comedy magazine industry was not really thriving at that time. So we decided we wanted to go into TV writing. And we had a real hell of a time. We got a job working for a cable show in New York, which ended very quickly. And then we moved to LA and were unemployed for like a couple years. And it was kind of hard, it was hard to break in until we finally wrote this spec script. You have to write a spec script, which just shows off your, you write a script for free of a show you like to show off your writing skills. And we had written a couple of ones that weren't very good. And then finally Seinfeld came out. And this was when Seinfeld was in its first 4 episodes. It was still called the Seinfeld Chronicles. We really liked it. And we decided we're just going to write a spec script for Seinfeld. And it was really popular, and it immediately got us a number of job offers, and including an assignment to write on The Simpsons. And then they liked our Simpsons script and they hired us. So that's how we got our start. Basically, it's
Wow.
kind of a long, convoluted story. But once we got hired, once making it through the gate is the hard part. And once we made it through the gate, we had a number of lucky strokes of luck at The Simpsons, which allowed us to be running the show within 2 years of having arrived there.
Wow.
Like Conan O'Brien, who was ahead of us in line, suddenly became a famous talk show host and left, thereby making us the most senior people there after like 8 months. And many of the other original writers left. So we did have a number of strokes of luck that got us to running the show only 2 years after having started, and only a few years out of college.
That's incredible. I'm just like interested now because that was felt like quite an organic way to get into the industry, because you were doing it writing from a young age, and obviously very passionate about it. So do you think, I mean, nowadays, if you were a writer trying to get into the industry, because you mentioned like writing a spec script and things like that, do you think that still exists now? Is that still a common thing to happen?
Yes, but it's not quite as common as it once was. It's first of all, I should say that like, I also had the additional benefit of having been on the Harvard Lampoon, and people who knew, people from the Harvard Lampoon were more prone to read my scripts. And I think that's probably what happened to The Simpsons with Mike Reiss and Al Jean, who had also been on Lampoon, and they were more willing to probably read our script than they were just some random person. So there's definitely that kind of thing. In any case, though, now that is still the way things are done, but it is not quite the same. First of all, there's so many more TV shows and TV types of things than there were in the 90s, but they all pay a lot less, and the work is a lot less. Like back in the 90s, probably all the way from the 50s to the 90s, you worked on a TV show. Generally, there were 22 episodes a year. It was a full-time job all year long, and it was a good, it was like getting tenure at especially if you're at a show that was not going to get canceled. It was great because you had a full-time job that paid well. And now, most shows, very few shows make 22 episodes a year. A number of them make 6, these streaming shows, but there are more shows, so there's more opportunities, but it's all like, this is not going to pay the bills, and so it's more difficult in that way. Although there's also different ways in. Like, I think a lot of people are getting, the spec script is definitely the way, still the gold standard, because you want somebody who can execute. You don't want to hire somebody who's really funny on YouTube but can't write a freaking scene. That's the thing. It's very annoying to hire people who are funny, but they can't write the script, because that's what you need ultimately, is a script that you can produce. And if you have to sit there rewriting the script, the whole staff has to take 8 solid work days to rewrite your lousy script. It doesn't matter how funny your Twitter account is. That's the thing. And so that's the thing. The ability to execute a script in the format and style of the show is still critical. However, not everybody, you don't need everybody to do that. You can have, if you have a really funny guy who makes up all the jokes but can't write the script, then you just have him make up the jokes. There's its ability to manage people and understand their styles, which is important. So anyway, to get back to the point, yes, you can. You still need to be able to execute the script, but not everybody has to do that. You can still be really funny on YouTube or Twitter, and funny in different ways, or really brilliant at creating characters or stuff like that. There's different skills and different skill sets that can get you hired in TV. But let me also say, I don't know that getting hired in TV is all that great in these days. Like, if I were really funny, I still and young, I might try to just become famous on YouTube and make all the money myself, rather than have to worry about, like, I know it's hard to become famous on YouTube, but it's probably not that much harder than getting hired to work on a TV show. And the TV show, you're working all day long, executing someone else's vision, and then you're going to be dumped out on the street after 5 months when it's over. Whereas building your own brand on YouTube or whatever, you could do whatever you want. You don't have to take any orders from anyone else or any executive notes, and the money all comes to you. So it's like, I think that like TV is still a great medium, and it's a great place to execute your vision or whatever, but it's not the only one. And it's not even like, as I said, in the 90s, that was where all the money is. I don't think that's the case anymore.
You talked obviously about, we talked about Josh, sorry. I was going to ask you, like, how, when you two worked together, how did you kind of collaborate? Was it quite, you mentioned there that one person in theory could write jokes, and the person could concentrate on the script. Just curious, how did it work between you two?
A couple different ways. For the majority of the time that we worked at The Simpsons, and when we were writing our pilots, we would just sit at the computer together, and it's fun. Like that's the thing it's far more fun than sitting there by yourself. To sit there with your best friend and make up the jokes and the scenes and stuff. So we would just sit there literally at the computer together and write the scenes. That's an extremely slow process though, and it's arduous because you just got to go through it. Step by step and scene by scene and line by line, and it takes a while. Then we finally, I think around 2005, we started a different way of doing it where we kind of talk through the story or the scenes, and then we'd each do a draft. Like Josh would write the first half and I'd write the second half, and then we'd swap, and then I'd rewrite his half, and then we'd kind of go over it together. But like that was far more efficient, and the quality was the same, and it wasn't it was a slightly more efficient way of doing it. It's a far more efficient way of doing it because it didn't take so much time. You were just laboriously going through it in order. Like you kind of broke the scenes down, and you'd also find that you didn't write so much stuff that had to be cut. That's the thing. Like for years we wrote scripts that were 20 pages too long, filled with 20 pages of brilliant material that simply had to be cut. And we decided that was a waste of time. So we kind of wrote these, if you write a half-assed version first, you kind of know where you are. And then especially if you swap, you can go a lot faster, and the end product is just as good.
So, I mean, you get like comedians who walk around every day with a pad of paper and a pen, who, spot things in real life and make up jokes that kind of way. Where would you say you'd get inspiration for kind of your comedy writing? Would it be in things you come across in real life, or where'd you dream up the ideas?
I think this is a cliche, but it kind of comes from everywhere. A lot of it comes from things that it comes from real life things, real life events and people, and it also comes from things you read. And like, that's like, I read a lot of kind of obscure materials. I know Josh reads a ton of old, weird books and stuff like that. But also just like from news items, and in The Simpsons, some fair amount of stuff that we did came from the USA Today newspaper, where we just read about like, oh, this town has legalized gambling and has caused trouble. And then we're like, hey, that sounds like a Simpsons episode. So, the inspiration comes from all over, and it's kind of putting things together in your head, two different types of things.
You touched upon when you kind of joined the Simpsons team, kind of how quickly, you were basically one of the top writers. Just explain like how special kind of was that time when you first joined the Simpsons? Because, I mean, I know that back then it was still kind of in its infancy, but it was still very popular. So what did that kind of mean to you?
It was extremely intimidating. That we didn't know anything about this. This was our first, like, I told you that we worked on that cable show, and we'd also worked on another variety show that had been canceled after 3 weeks, but we had been unemployed for about a year and a half before this. So it was extremely exciting to even get the assignment to work on The Simpsons, because that was when The Simpsons, we were huge fans of the show. Before, the show had been on for about 2.5 years at this point, and it had already peaked. It had already gone. It's already had its. The Simpsons was never more popular than it was in its first season, ratings wise, when it was beating Bill Cosby and stuff like that. Like when it was on, it was in the top 10. And during the time that we worked there, it was probably always in the top. It was in the top 30 or 40 maybe, but never in the top 10. And so it was. But we were huge fans of the show, and so when we got the opportunity to write a script, it was very intimidating. We wrote a script that they rewrote heavily, but not so much more heavily than anyone else's, I guess. And then when we got hired there, we didn't. It was amazing. It was absolutely staggering to get actually hired to work at The Simpsons at that time, because they had only. It was all the original people were still there. They hadn't hired anybody new except for Conan O'Brien, who got hired about 4 months before us. So, and these guys, the guys in the room at that point were legends. Like, these were famous guys in comedy writer circles. You knew, like George Meyer, John Swartzwelder, John Vitti, Mike Reese, and Al Jean. Like, it's a murderer's row of people, and we're tossed in there, and we're nobodies. And so we were just like, we didn't even have any idea also how it worked on the TV show, like, because they gave us the title story editors, and we were like, oh shit, we're going to have to edit the stories of these guys that we thought we were going to be rewriting, but actually story editor is just it's just the second lowest type of writer. So yeah, it was very intimidating. And eventually, after a few weeks of kind of just listening and getting the vibe of the room, we started to get more. We started to say more stuff and get more stuff into the script. And then we wrote our script. We wrote that first one on staff was that one where Marge goes to shoplifts and goes to jail. And that first draft came out really well. And then shortly after that, everyone left. And it was just us and Conan and Dan McGrath were literally the only people working on the show.
Wow.
And that at that point, there's the intimidation factor dissolved because we were the only people working on the show, and we were the most senior. We were the second most senior people working on the show. And then Conan left, as I said, I think 3 months after that. So that part, it was a rapid ascension to becoming the most senior guys in less than a year, I guess.
I know it's not the best question, but just out of curiosity, how long would it take to go from, a blank page, starting to write the script, to then it actually being aired?
It takes 11 months from the time you turn in the first draft of the script to the time that the show airs. It takes 11 months. Most of that time is animation time. There's also a lot of pre-write, like you don't just start writing the script. There's a lot of pre-writing of making up of the story and discussing the story with the other writers at the story retreat and things like that, which takes a lot of work in advance. So there's probably another couple months of that before you even sit down to start typing.
Obviously, Simpsons is huge all around the world, and it's popular everywhere, and it's recepted as like hilarious in any country. So I'm intrigued to see like what you think about the correlation between UK and US humour, because I know some people see them as quite vastly different, but The Simpsons seems to, it's well respected everywhere.
I think The Simpsons is a unique. The fact that it's animated is something that gives it more of a universal appeal. Like the show, like you guys know the show Malcolm in the Middle. You ever seen that show?
Yeah.
It's a very Simpsons-y like show, but the fact that it's not animated, I think, is that the thing about animation is that like it has a certain appeal to everyone, especially to kids all over the world, because of the visuals. And when you have a live action show, even a show that's equally funny as The Simpsons, it's just not quite the same thing. So that's what. Also, The Simpsons I would say it was revolutionary at a certain point because there wasn't anything else like it. Hadn't been since the Flintstones for 30 years earlier. So a primetime animated show. Being the first primetime animated show, especially one with that kind of irreverent sense of humor, which was not on TV very much at that time, was a couple of different types of new things together at once. I think there's a lot of slapstick and humor that translates well. There's not a lot of observational. Like I heard that Seinfeld is not all that popular overseas, and it was number one here for many years. And so I think that like there's a certain universality to a lot of the jokes in The Simpsons because a lot of them just are slapstick stuff about a stupid guy or obnoxious kid that it transcends every culture,
How do you think kind of cartoons aimed at more of an adult or general audience, how do you think they've stayed so popular? Because if you think nowadays there's loads, on sort of Netflix and modern streaming services, obviously culture's changed and media's changed. And yeah, just kind of curious to get your opinion on why it's managed to stay so kind of popular.
I think, because people grew up with them. I think that's the thing. There was a huge generation gap when The Simpsons came out. People thought that cartoons were for kids. I can't make that clear enough. Like the only time you'd ever see cartoons that were not for kids were maybe like a midnight movie where they'd have Spike and Mike's and Twisted Animation Festival, or something like that, or something from overseas. So when The Simpsons came out, everybody was like, animation is for kids. And I can't tell you how annoying it was to hear this. Like when you were working on The Simpsons in 1995, you'd constantly run into people, including TV executives, who were like, "Oh, I don't watch cartoons. Cartoons are for kids." And they would say it with no shame whatsoever. And so like now, I think that's changed. Obviously, people who grew up watching The Simpsons don't have that built-in prejudice. So, and also because so many other shows like South Park, King of the Hill, Futurama also became part of people's growing up. Like now you don't run into that at all, at least as far as I can tell. And so that's one. So the prejudice against it has vanished, thank God, or mostly vanished, or been beaten into the closet. And the second thing is that I think animated shows provide for more excitement than regular live action shows, because you also get, like, live action shows, they all look kind of the same because they're all photographed kind of the same. And that's just the nature of photography. Whereas animation, you get not only you get something on top of that. Like, I don't know if you get BoJack Horseman. You get stuff
Yep.
that can't happen in real life.
Yeah.
And you get stuff that gives you, and even animated shows that are very realistic, like King of the Hill. I don't know if you guys got that over there, but King of the Hill would have been entirely different if it were live action. Even though that show could have easily been live action, it would have been entirely different and not nearly as entertaining, because something about the way that the things are drawn and the way the style of the show infuses the sense of humor. Like I like to think about like Family Guy, if it were drawn realistically, it'd be a very totally different show. Or King of the Hill, if it were drawn really cartoony, it would be a very different show. So you get I guess you're getting a different dimension. You get an added dimension of entertainment and comic possibility with animation that you don't get in live action.
Yeah, I mean, to go back to The Simpsons, obviously, it's so iconic, especially for kind of people our age, because I'm 29. So yeah, I was very much the generation when it was, really, really big. And did you ever envision it being as big as it still is now? Like, did you ever think back then when you're writing these episodes that it'd be so iconic, or, was it just another script for you, sort of thing?
Well, we knew it was iconic because, I mean, I think we had a somewhat unique perspective in that we were huge fans of the show before we got hired there. Everyone else like kind of was inside the bubble and didn't know, except maybe for Conan, but he had other stuff going on. Like to us, like The Simpsons it was like getting hired to, as I said, use this again, it was like getting hired to write for Mad Magazine in 1957 or getting hired to write for Saturday Night Live in 1976. Like, it was the thing. And so we loved it. We knew it was going to be successful, but I do think we thought it was going to end. And I've said this before on DVD commentaries and other interviews. No TV shows didn't go past 8 or 9 seasons. Like, even, think about all the huge shows of like of that era, and Cheers and I don't know, Murphy Brown and MASH, like 7, 8, 9 seasons. That was it. Like, TV shows did not go past that period. And so when we were running the show, we were like, this show is going to be over in 2 years. Let's have all the fun we can possibly have with this stupid thing in this sandbox before it dissolves. And so that was where we started doing stuff like 22 short films and the Frank Grimes episode and the Spin-Off Spectacular, because we were like, this is a great sandbox that Jim and Matt and Sam have given us. I want to have all the possible fun with this thing we can have before it goes away. And so when we left, we were absolutely certain the show was going to be gone within a year or two, 9 or 10. And here we are now, 25 years later, it's still going. No, I tell you, nobody could have predicted that. It's absurd that a TV show, that a comedy sitcom would be on for that long is unprecedented in the history of television.
Amazing, isn't it? And like we were mentioning before, how comedy changes over the decades. Have you noticed The Simpsons humor changing at all over time?
I have only seen a few episodes since I left the show, because it's hard for me to watch the show without being like, that's not the way I would do it, and it makes me frustrated. So I don't watch it for entertainment value. I watched a couple of the special episodes that I've really enjoyed, like the one where they went to Portland, obviously, because I live in Portland, things like that. But I can't really speak to what the show was like these days. I have no idea.
I mean, we can't not mention the iconic kind of, well, it's become a meme now, hasn't it? The steamed hams.
It was meme of the year last year. It was the most meme thing in either 2018 or 2019. It was literally internet meme of the year. There's a huge, anybody who's interested in this topic needs to Google Mail Magazine about a month ago, or did the world's most comprehensive history and analysis of the steamed hams thing. So it's mailmagazine.com, and just look for their steamed hams article. Like, that guy really did his research, and it talks to all the people from all over the world who were involved in making this thing a meme. And it's quite comprehensive. Yes, for me, I don't get any money for it. That's a little bit annoying. But it is, people know me as the steamed hams guy. I'm sure that's going to end up being on my tombstone. And so I'm fine with it. I like it. It's not like I'm the guy, famous guy whose pants fell down on live TV. I'm pleased. I like the segment. I'm pleased that it took 20 years before anybody paid any attention. Like, you have to remember that between 1996 when it aired and 2016, I never heard about it. But now that it's suddenly come back, it's delights. I'm glad everybody liked it. I'm happy to hear that.
Yeah, and do you have a favorite meme that you've seen?
Yeah, I said it in that in the article. There's this one. I mean, there's a number of great videos like that one, the Aha Take on Me thing, the hand drawn one, which is absolutely staggering.
Yeah.
And there's a Lego one, and there's a number of other crazy ones with the audio and stuff that just baffle me. Like every word is the one where they've edited, like every word is said in alphabetical order. That's a crazy one. And then I also like this one that is, if you go to Mel Magazine and look it up, you'll see it. I don't really want to spoil it, but it's a real sensitive one. It's just a comic strip, like an 8-panel comic strip, where about Skinner and Chalmers' relationship, and I won't spoil it any further than that because it'd be better if you don't know what's coming.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a great episode. So many quotable lines from that episode. But yeah, very, very good. Another kind of iconic episode which you worked on was Who Shot Mr. Burns? And,
Yes.
With that, I've read that at first, were you not too keen on it being kind of Maggie, the killer? Or is that...
No, we wanted it to be Barney. Like at that point, this was before Barney became sober, and everybody was like, Barney's getting Barney's getting tiresome. These drunk jokes are getting tiresome. Let's send Barney away. And we were like, it's perfect because Barney has no apparent motive to murder Mr. Burns. And we were like, we thought it'd be super cool because like then it just changed the dynamic of the show to have Barney be in prison and then he gets paroled a couple years later. It'd be interesting. So that was what we were kind of dead set. We also wanted it to be a mystery that was like kind of complex and whatever. So when we took it to the story retreat, Jim Brooks was like, it needs to be a Simpson who committed the murder. And we were like, no. And then he was like, what if it was the baby? And we were like, oh, that's terrible. But you're not going to tell it to Jim Brooks because he's the genius. He's a television and he's a dramatic genius. So we were like, we didn't like it. We thought that was corny. And we went back to the writer's room and David Merkin, who's running the show, was like, okay, what if it was Maggie, but it was not an accident? And then we were like, hey, we like that. And we were like, but how are we going to communicate that it was not an accident? Well, all we have to do is have her eyes dart at the end so that she looks like she knew what she was doing. And then we were like, okay, that's it. That's great. That's great. That's perfect. It's so much better that it is a Simpson. Jim Brooks is right. That's why he's Jim Brooks. And Merkin solved our problem with it by making it not be an accident. And so that's, and the rest is history.
I'm going to have to watch that episode as soon as we finish this call. I can't wait to see that one again.
Yeah, that's fun. That's my favorite one that we wrote. Who Shot Mr. Burns Part 1 is my favorite Simpsons script that we wrote. I think maybe that in Australia.
I was going to mention Australia. So where did the boot idea come from?
That was not our idea either. Like a lot of times people are like, we love that crazy shit that you made up. And we're like, we don't like the crazy shit. We like the stuff that's a little more realistic. So like when we had it, it was based on that incident where that guy got caned, that kid who was, in the 90s. I think it was we had some other punishment for him that was far more realistic. And Merkin, again, was like, I think he wanted something crazier and he made up the boot. So we were like, oh, that's too silly. But in retrospect, it's great. So like at the time, we were on a constant battle to not make the show too silly. And there was forces pulling against us. And in retrospect, I think it was a good blend of our stuff that was a little more realistic, down to earth, and observational, combined with the extremely silly stuff that would come from Merkin or Swartzwelder, made a good blend.
Another great episode. When you kind of write an episode like that, did you always know you wanted to set it in Australia?
No, that was the point. We were like, it was one of those things where we were making up stories for the story conference or whatever, and a lot of times you would be like, many of the episodes have titles that are like Bart versus Thanksgiving. Or Lisa versus Malibu Stacy. So one of the ways that you come up with a story is what's the other side of that? Bart versus blank. And we were like, what's something that's really big that he could be, something that's huge that he could be versus? And we're like, well, how about a continent? Well, okay, Australia seems like a continent. And they're like, oh my god. And then the thing is, it immediately starts coming together once you have that idea, because it's like, wait a minute, we could just pack this whole thing filled with Australia jokes. People in Australia like The Simpsons, and so it's like immediately once you have the slot machine with the 3 reels, Bart versus, and it ends on in Australia, you're like that story writes itself pretty much, and so that was like it came together quickly because we were literally just looking for what could fill in the second part of this equation, Bart versus blank.
So you've written episodes for various TV shows. Has there been one in particular which you can think of which, when it was first released, wasn't that well received?
Yeah, well, I mean, most of those things, those things, they don't get to come back. The things that are not popular don't get to come back. Unfortunately, The Simpsons is the only thing that I've done a ton of stuff that for instance, the entire series of Mission Hill, which Josh and I created, which is our pride and joy, went down the tubes after 2 weeks in 1999. But then it ran on Adult Swim for 5 straight years. And so people love it now. And we're actually in the process of maybe trying to bring it back or bring off a spin-off of it. So that's yes, that's one thing. The other things we've done, we did a lot of things that I think are terrific that you never heard about. Like we wrote a movie that was going to be made, and then they suddenly didn't make it, and now it's in a file cabinet somewhere, or someone's hard drive. And we had a number of other TV shows that we did pilots for that were also, in my opinion, excellent. Which but they never saw the light of day. That that's literally on a DVD or VHS tape in some vault somewhere. So unfortunately, most of the things that we've done that we thought were great that deserved a second chance are never going to get that chance. The Simpsons has the benefit of constantly airing for 25 straight years. So episodes like nobody liked the Frank Grimes episode when as far as we knew, it just was broadcasted to a void of people who didn't like it. And so, but then now it turns out people did like it, or they like it now. Same with Steamed Hams and 22 Short Films episodes. So those are the ones that have gotten their vindication over time, I would say. The other projects that we worked on have not been so fortunate.
So in terms of like, at the moment, I know you do a lot of food reviews, and that's a big thing for you at the moment.
Yes.
What's kind of like been the weirdest food that you've reviewed so far?
I don't generally try to review weird food because there's plenty of people doing a lot of stunt stuff. I have done some, but I have to YouTube is loaded with people like, I'm going to eat these ground up worms and stuff like that. And there's that. I'm not trying to tread into that world. I'm trying to review stuff seriously, but I have done a couple of weird things, like just because I'm curious about them personally, like Limburger cheese. I never had it. I was like, I heard about it in cartoons for 50 years. I had to try it. So I did Limburger cheese. I also ate some crickets, but like, that was again for my own. There was like packaged crickets that were barbecue flavored, but again, I wanted to try those. The one thing that I have sitting here that I don't want to eat, but I'm going to, is this surströmming. You guys know what surströmming is? Is this pickled herring from Sweden that is fermented and rotten? It's apparently the smelliest food in the world. And somebody sent it to me, and I was like, "Will you review this?" And I was like, I kind of have a morbid curiosity about it, so that will probably be upcoming. And like. Other than that, like I prefer to review good food or new food of a certain prominence. But like this is my hobby. Like this is not a thing that pays any money. I do it. I mainly do it on Instagram and these 59-second videos. But it's a fun hobby, and it's resulted in me getting a ton of free food, food and beer and liquor and stuff from people all over the world. And I have just this whole room is filled with Canadian potato chips and Japanese sodas and all this stuff. And that's a huge treat. And also, I want to theoretically, I want to fashion myself into the kind of person that you would see on the Food Network or something like that, who's like a celebrity. That show's loaded with people who aren't chefs, but seem to be respected in their take about food, and I want that kind of person to be me. I want to be one of those people.
Have you had anything kind of sent over to you from the UK that you can think of top of your head?
Yes, I have gotten. I get a lot more stuff from Canada because it's a lot cheaper for people to send stuff. I just got my first package from Australia, which I am thrilled about, and I got. I've had 2 or 3 things from the UK, and my favorite thing is those Irish potato chips, those Tato. I don't know, you guys aren't in Ireland, but they're called Tato, and they have a number of unusual flavors that are kind of Irish origin, and I love those. I have not had, I've had some things from the UK, but I tend to like the candies there. Like the Lion Bar is one of my favorite candies in the world, and I don't really recall any specifically amazing potato chips. I think those came from Ireland.
Our chips, they're not that great.
Walkers, right?
Yeah,
exactly. I did have 1 or 2 really good Walkers, but I don't. The flavors don't spring to mind at the moment.
In terms of away from food review stuff, what have you got on the horizon? Any kind of projects you can tell us about?
I am working on a pilot for Adult Swim that I am writing with that is going to be kind of crazy. It's kind of a Swartzweldery universe type thing, and even though I'm writing it, and that's my full-time thing right now. I'm also, Josh and I have been working literally for almost a year on a reboot. It's not a reboot of Mission Hill. It's basically the Mission Hill. It's a continuation of Mission Hill that starts 6 months after the original series, with an emphasis on Gus and Wally, the older gay men, and but anytime you have to deal with these rights issues and stuff, it's like the Warner Brothers is literally taken 10 months of dealing with this contract, and we still aren't even close to done. So those are the two biggest things. And then, obviously, if people follow me on Instagram, almost every week, certainly almost every day, I have something new on my Instagram story, and every week or so, I have a new, somewhat humorous food review on my regular Instagram. So that's, if you're interested in seeing what I'm up to, that's the easiest way to do it, because it doesn't have to go through 1,000 layers of executives and corporations. And that's why, again, I'm back to this thing about YouTube, where like the more layers of approval you have to get, and the more money you have to get from the outside world, the slower it's going to be, the more of a hassle it's going to be. But the payoff could be huge. But payoff could also be huge if you have 1 million followers on YouTube. So, that's there's more choices. I like that there's more choices for stuff like this today.
Definitely. Ben, did you have anything else you wanted to ask?
I think that wraps us up really nicely, and I'm very aware, Bill, that you've probably got a lot to do today. So
I'm just going to sit inside and try to not inhale too much smoke. That's all I'm going to do. I got these air purifiers going, and because we have these forest fires here in Oregon, and this city is under this huge blanket of smoke that even inside makes it smell like there's a barbecue going on in your living room. Oh yeah, we also, of course, have a pandemic, and we also have a crazy president who's ruining the country. So those three things combine to make it not the ideal time, but I'm happy to spend a little time with you guys to talk about something else.
Cool.
Great, we appreciate it.
Yeah, right. Well, thanks so much for coming on the show and just giving us an hour of your time just to pick your brains about these kind of things. It's so interesting to chat to you. And
excellent. Well, have a good rest of what remains of your weekend, guys. It's great to talk to you.
Thank you very much. You too. Thanks, Bill. I'm Ben, and that was Chris. We're Northern Safari. Thanks for listening.